Most people have heard about the invasion of Hamas into Israel land, but not many know how the war between these two groups could lead to a greater World War III. At 6:30 a.m. on October 7th, 2023, Hamas militants paraglided into Israel and invaded a music festival that left hundreds dead and hundreds more taken as hostages and brought back into the Gaza Strip. What began as this initial invasion by Hamas has now turned into a global phenomenon, and talks of a potential World War III are ramping up where countries are already taking action. The United States has sent naval ships to patrol in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, where these ships have already shot down rockets from the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon, two extremely dangerous terrorist groups. Russia has blamed this war on the United States for trying to profit off the conflict and ignoring the Palestinians' request for creating a new independent Palestinian state. China has tried remaining relatively neutral, but also has a strong dependence on the Arab nearby countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia for the majority of its oil. India has transformed from an exclusive pro-Palestinian country to the complete opposite and to one that is very empathetic of Israel. If we move to the Middle East, these countries are essentially all on Palestine's side, given most of these countries were once united under the Ottoman Empire. As you can see, this is an incredibly decisive war, as most of the world's largest nations have some type of political or economic ties to the Middle East, with two different sides seeming to form. But with all this chaos emerging between the world's superpowers, what would actually have to happen to ignite the next World War? Soon after Hamas and Gaza made this initial invasion into Israel, airstrikes began ramping up amongst both sides. Hamas has made their way into many Israeli towns on foot, while Israel has mostly been relying on their high-tech airstrikes. Gaza has been decimated so far, and it hasn't even been a full month of fighting yet. The price for water and food in Gaza has become only affordable for the rich, the power has been cut off for the entire strip, making communication extremely difficult, and the last remaining hospitals are on the brink of collapse. Israel has cut off any travel in or out of Gaza, where they have told Palestinians to evacuate to the southern side of the strip, as this area won't be attacked with airstrikes. Humanitarian aid trucks also weren't allowed to enter Gaza until 2 weeks after the initial invasion on October 21st. The Palestinians are still lacking essential supplies necessary for survival, but the US has been urging Israel to allow humanitarian aid trucks to enter Gaza each day through the Rafah border crossing. Israel is concerned that these resources are going straight to Hamas and aiding them in their fight against Israel, rather than going towards the Palestinians who actually need the support. Palestine has certainly been taking the greater toll from this war, given they are the far poorer and less technologically advanced country, but there's obviously been atrocities taking place on both sides. But with the fighting taking place in just Gaza and southern Israel, how exactly could this lead to a greater world war? Well, the fighting has actually been more widespread than just Gaza and Israel, and has included some of the world's largest countries. On October 9th, just 2 days after the initial invasion, a terrorist group that operates in many Arab countries known as Hezbollah fired missiles from Lebanon into northern Israel. Hezbollah has strong ties with Hamas in Gaza and has actively been trying to help Hamas win this war. Hezbollah claims they have 150,000 rockets pointed at Israel, scattered mainly amongst Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. Already, 19,000 people have fled southern Lebanon over fears that this area will only become more violent as Israel increases their counterstrikes against Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Iran over the years has been funding Hezbollah, building the group up with training, funding, and weapons. The Iranian government sees Israel as an illegitimate country and has been using Hezbollah to indirectly attack Israel. Hezbollah is known to have 20,000 active fighters, making the militant group very capable of bringing even more chaos to the Middle East. Hezbollah's biggest goal is to win back the Golan Heights from Israel, which only the United States has ever recognized as belonging to Israel. The Golan Heights turned over from Syria to Israel during the closing stages of the Six-Day War in 1967. Syrian inhabitants fled the area during the war, and a new borderline was established where the region was now under Israeli military control. Israel believes that the Golan Heights is an extremely valuable stretch of land, as it separates the chaos unfolding with the civil war in Syria from the safe for Israeli towns just on the other side. Hezbollah and the other Arab countries has never formally recognized this as Israeli land, and the Golan Heights could very soon become a new battleground between Hezbollah and the Israeli military. Hezbollah isn't just coming after the Israeli military though. Hezbollah has another target in mind. The United States has many military bases scattered throughout the Middle East in order to hopefully facilitate more peace in this hostile region. The US has been expanding their presence in the Middle East ever since this initial Hamas invasion, as the US is trying to counter Iran's funding towards Hamas and Hezbollah. These US military bases have been undergoing missile strikes from Iran-backed militant groups like Hezbollah and even the Houthis in Yemen. On October 19th, the Houthis in Yemen fired 5 missiles north in the direction of Israel. The USS Carney was positioned in the Red Sea and shot down these missiles as they were making their way north up the Red Sea. Iran has backed the Houthis for years, as they have continuously threatened Saudi Arabia, who is another one of America's top allies, mainly because this is where a large portion of the United States oil comes from. These US military bases that have been expanding in the Middle East have recently been encountering more and more airstrikes from these Iran-backed militant groups. 23 times since October 17th, the United States has had to shoot down missiles coming towards their air bases, namely the Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq and the Al-Tanf Garrison Base in Syria. Most missiles were successfully shot down, but some did detonate at these bases, leaving 21 US troops injured so far. These are somewhat regular attacks, but the number of missiles coming for these US bases has dramatically increased ever since the Hamas invasion. This has led the United States to send more naval ships to patrol in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, with 2,000 US troops aboard. The United Nations has been urgently calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which has been rejected by Israel and the United States, saying that a ceasefire doesn't do enough for Israel's right to self-defense. Israel also argues that there was a ceasefire in place before October 7th, but Hamas were the ones to break it, so now it means time for war. Another country that has been very critical of the United States' handling of the war in the Middle East is Russia, who claims the United States is involved solely for financial incentives. Vladimir Putin of Russia has responded to the war by saying that Israel is replying to an attack of unprecedented cruelty by using cruel methods of its own. Russia has also described Israel's actions as unacceptable, given Israel is sending airstrikes into a city with 2 million people. The relationship between Israel and Russia has been traditionally strong, but has since weakened with Putin coming after Israel's retaliation. Russia has also recently argued that the US needs constant chaos in the Middle East, as the United States private military contractors have profited immensely from this Middle East violence. The US has spent $5 trillion on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where a majority of the money was sent to these private military contractors. These military contracting companies had so many employees that they outnumbered the number of troops that were actually fighting in Afghanistan 3 to 1, with Putin attempting to divert all the attention away from his invasion into Ukraine and highlight the issues within the Middle East. This gives Putin a better shot at winning their war with Ukraine. With more money and attention flowing to the Middle East, Ukraine will lose some support among Western allies and ultimately have a tougher time at defeating Russia. While Russia has obviously never explicitly said that this is their goal, we can see a similar tactic being played out by China. China has also been calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. China has always supported a two-nation state with Israel and Palestine, but has stated Israel's bombardment of civilians in Gaza has gone beyond the scope of self-defense. The Chinese Secretary of Defense also avoided condemning the extreme violence that Hamas has committed against civilians. China is being seen as attempting to take the upper hand on the United States by promoting itself as a peace-seeking neutral power, while the US has clearly backed one side of the fight. Another reason China may be hesitant to fully support one side is that a large portion of their sanctioned oil comes from Iran, and as we mentioned earlier, Iran has been longtime enemies of Israel. If China were to break their alliance with Iran, this would certainly hurt their ability to cheaply import oil. China, similar to Russia, also knows that the more attention that diverts towards the Middle East, the less noticed they will be when attempting to make a more serious move on Taiwan. Taiwan. Taiwan is currently patrolled by the United States, but China still views Taiwan as a Chinese province. The fight for Taiwan hasn't been violent yet, but China continues to send more and more jets to hover around Taiwan's airspace, signaling a threat to the United States. The Chinese Communist Party also conducts more than 2 million cyber attacks a month on Taiwan, which includes malicious emails and disinformation that gets to the people of Taiwan. An invasion into Taiwan could be China's next big move to assert itself as the world's most dominant country. So based on everything we have just gone over, what would the different sides be to this potential World War III? If we start from Israel and Palestine and move our way outwards, Israel would be aligned with the Western alliances and Palestine the Eastern. Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Yemen would also be an Eastern ally, while Saudi Arabia would likely align with the West. Moving out some more, Turkey, Ukraine, and essentially all of the European Union would align with the West, while Afghanistan and Pakistan would align with the East. And finally, moving out some more, the United States would certainly align with the West, as well as Canada, India, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, while Russia, China, and North Korea would most likely align with the East. This obviously isn't all certain, but if a World War III were to begin, these are likely the sides that most of these countries would take, but I think we can all agree that we're praying this never happens.